Hello, welcome back to Historical Terminology. Today, we're going to talk about Reconstruction, which is how the North failed the South after the Civil War. Reconstruction was meant to change the Southern culture and change the South to make it more amicable, and a better part of our Union, but it fell way short of that. We'll talk about that a little bit. So, as you may know, the Civil War in America began in 1860 after the election of Abraham, or I guess 1861 after the election of Abraham Lincoln. Southern states seceded from the Union due to fears that Lincoln would pass legislation interfering with slavery. He was kind of the first. He was the first president who ran on the idea of potentially having abolition of slavery. The war ended up lasting 5 years and cost countless lives. And this was all because of this slavery question, which has dominated American politics its entire existence. So how to resolve this conflict and then punish the people who had seceded from the nation was kind of this large question of, well, what are we going to do? This has never happened before. How are we going to go forward from here? So when the war ended in 1865, General Lee surrendered in Virginia, and now what to do with the Confederate States and their soldiers and their leaders was now up for debate. Should the United States forgive and reconcile with these people who had fought for 5 years against them, or should we punish them and make them pay for all the things that they had done to our country? So that was kind of the big debate, and there was obviously people on both sides, right? Of whether they wanted to be lenient or they wanted to be stricter with the punishment. So the story ends up, oh, you can't really see that, can you? Oops. Well, anyway, it's kind of the story of two different groups that made up this situation, right? On the one hand, on the left side, you would have seen it, Lincoln and Johnson, the presidents at the time, right? Lincoln gets assassinated and then Johnson becomes president. They wanted Reconstruction to be handled like this. They wanted states to pay off their own debts. They wanted the federal government to not be able to force southern states to follow certain voting laws or recommendations. All the territory taken by the Army was going to be given back to the original owners. And then southern states were allowed to enact these black codes, which is kind of the beginning of Jim Crow. Kind of the first trial run of it. On the other hand, then, they had what's called the Radical Republican group in Congress. Basically, at the midterm elections when Johnson was president, these Republicans in Congress won, and they won on this radical platform of the South needs to be punished for the war. And so under the Reconstruction Act of 1867, the South was divided into 5 military districts, and the U.S. Army was controlling it. So basically, the South became an occupied territory of the U.S. Army. They instituted universal male suffrage, so all men, regardless of race, could vote. Southern states had to ratify the 14th Amendment to rejoin the Union, and then they also were then forced to pass the 15th Amendment as well. And these were amendments made to establish who was a citizen and to protect voting rights. So they were basically saying that you have to allow these people, whether they were slaves or not, whether they're black or not, they need to be able to vote, and they need to be full citizens, or else we're not going to allow you back into our country. So that was kind of a big change in tone after the lenient version that the presidents had put forth before Congress took over. Now, how did white Southerners respond to this? Well, by 1867, Southern whites were very angry about radical Reconstruction, and they had turned to violence to stop it from being taken effect. So basically, the Ku Klux Klan was founded, amongst other hate groups, and they would murder black and white leaders of local Republican parties, as well as any black person who stood up to white authority. And by 1875, the federal government was unwilling to reinforce Republican-held Southern states with troops to stop these violent uprisings. So basically, the federal government abandoned these people who were trying to make America a better place. Now, the black Southern response was fantastic. Black Americans won election to state governments and even to Congress in some states. Laws were passed creating the first tax-funded school districts in the South. They publicly invested in railroads and other infrastructure, and they created more equitable tax codes for the South. Also, they passed laws against racial discrimination, like transportation and in schooling and all sorts of stuff like that. So they were passing these laws that were basically ensuring that blacks were treated with equity in the South during this brief chance that they got under radical Reconstruction. Now, when did Reconstruction end? By 1876, only Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina were still governed by Republicans. So, because the federal government was no longer backing up these states and the army wasn't there to enforce order and law and the new laws, states started being won over by white Democrats who basically just put everything back the way they were before. And so then after a highly contested election in 1876, the members of the House were picking who the president was, and they struck a bargain that Rutherford B. Hayes, who is a Republican, could become president as long as Reconstruction officially ended. So basically, Republicans traded the safety of black Americans for the presidency at the time, which was a real short-term win. And it's going to cause a lot of long-term negative effects for the people of the South. So after Reconstruction ended, the South became kind of a block of states that all voted Democrat. And it was basically like a white power block. People who voted to enforce racism and white supremacy. This hegemony was enforced with violence and eventually the Jim Crow laws that were designed to keep black Americans out of power or even conversations about their community, right? These laws made it so that they had to be separated at all times from whites, and it created an unequal society by law in the South. The black Americans of the South are still trying to recover from this structural racism. Not to say that all structural racism is gone, because it's not, but this very obvious and abhorrent structural racism that was put in place under Jim Crow still has a great negative effect on the black people of the South because it set them back so much. Here are some references. I looked at history.com, and of course, more and more Wikipedia is becoming more and more useful and reliable due to the fact that they don't let just anybody edit it anymore, especially when it comes to things about history and science. So if you are looking for information about historical going-ons, Wikipedia has become a very solid place to look, especially because they are requiring citations and sources now for all entries. So pretty useful. And finally, I just wanted to thank you once again for watching. Please subscribe and help the channel, and it'll allow me to continue to make these videos. Thank you so much. Have a great day.